My name is Cade Martineau, and I'm doing Part 3, Chapter 4 of White Privilege. In this chapter, it's called White Privilege / White Supremacy. This chapter basically just talks about the fact that we are currently living in a white supremacist society, and it kind of gives some statistics backing that up as well as a story or two. So in order to understand why we are a white supremacist society, we should define white supremacist society. And it's basically a society whose founding is based in an ideology of the inherent superiority of white Europeans over non-whites. An ideology that was used to justify the crimes against indigenous people and Africans that created this nation. That's the definition straight from the book. Some facts that are stated in the book about white supremacy. This is an ideology that was used to justify the crimes against indigenous people and Africans that created the nation. This is something that was in the previous slide. It's kind of the second half of that white supremacist definition. It has also been used to justify illegal and extra-legal exploitation of every non-white immigrant group, according to the book. And it's used today to justify difference in the distribution of wealth and well-being in the society. So this means, obviously the dominant group or the whites in America are going to be more wealthy, and that wealth is going to be unevenly distributed. This is going to be covered in later slides a little bit more with some kind of statistical facts about this. Also, a society where white people occupy most of the top positions in powerful institutions is part of white supremacy. It's kind of more of a something that you can see if white supremacy exists. Is people being in higher positions, them being mostly white, if that makes sense. There are similar privileges available in limited ways to non-white people who fit themselves into white society. So that's basically just saying that, even though the positions do exist, similar positions, they aren't filled evenly by the minorities. There are a lot fewer minorities in those positions than whites. Alright, so now we're going to talk a little bit about some information that Bill Clinton's Council of Economic Advisors gathered when they were trying to offer up a conversation about race in the 1990s. This is obviously back when Bill Clinton was president. So the conversation obviously, it didn't get very far, but they did happen to gather a lot of information, which is kind of listed here. So what they found out is that on average, whites are more likely than members of racial or ethnic minorities to do all of these things. So they're more likely to attend primary or secondary schools with smaller class sizes. And this is obviously important because smaller class sizes makes it so you get more individual attention, which gets you a better education. They were more likely to have access to a computer in public schools or at home during primary and secondary schooling. Computers are important because they obviously give us access to more information and, again, a better education. They were more likely to attend and graduate from a 4-year college or university. they were also more likely to earn higher salaries. These two kind of go hand in hand. I mean, you're probably going to earn a higher salary if you graduate from college on average. Whites were more likely to retain employment during a downturn in the economy. So when the economy went down, the whites would keep their jobs, and other ethnic or racial minorities would be more likely to lose their jobs. Whites were more likely to be covered by health insurance and consequently gain access to health care. So they would basically have or be more likely to have health insurance and health care, which goes along with the next one, that they're more likely to survive certain life-threatening illnesses. So this racism actually impacted not just livelihood, but lives and just survivability. Whites were more likely to experience more favorable housing conditions, and it kind of gave some examples of this, like a better housing condition. And better housing conditions is less crowding, less crime, less litter and deterioration, and fewer problems with public services is how they defined a more favorable housing condition. And they found out that whites were more likely to spend a smaller percentage of household income on housing. This one just kind of makes sense, because if they're making more money and paying the same amount in rent, they're going to spend a smaller percentage of household income on housing. It also could be that more people in the home were, for whatever reason, able to work or get jobs or keep jobs, as stated before. So they got not just paid more, but more people working in that home. More people able to find a job. Whites were also more likely to have unembedded access to home mortgage loans and home ownership. This is a statistic that we kind of go over in a future slide a little bit as well. They were more likely to own stocks, mutual funds, and IRA accounts, which to me says that they not only had more spendable money, but they were also able to save more money and have a more secure future by owning stocks and things like that. They were more likely to gain a substantial net worth, and that one's kind of something that's almost obvious by reading the previous ones. So we can see here that whites were treated, or are treated, in our society now in America differently than other racial or ethnic minorities. This is racism that exists today and that we deal with every day. And again, it affects not only livelihood of those ethnic minorities, but it affects whether or not they do live or if they die, according to some of the things here on this list. Alright, so right after that, they start comparing blacks and whites, as opposed to whites and all ethnic minorities. According to a 2004 study done by United for a Fair Economy, the typical black family had 60% as much income as a white family in 1968, but only 58% as much in 2002. So they're actually worse off now than they were in 1968, comparatively. Also, it states that 1 in 9 African Americans can't find a job, and black unemployment is more than twice the white unemployment, which is a wider gap than in 1972, so again, we're trending in the wrong direction. Black infants are almost 2.5 times more likely to, as white infants, to die before age 1, which is a greater gap than in 1970. This is because we, whites have a more of a likelihood to have health insurance and all that stuff that was talked about on the previous slide. Also, white households had an average net worth of $468,200 in 2001, which is more than 6 times the $75,700 of black households. In 1989, their wealth was 5.5 times that of black wealth. So the gap is actually, again, larger than it was back in 1989, 1970s, 1980s. Alright, so how long would it take to close the gap between blacks and whites? According to the book, it says that the gap wouldn't be closed until 2152. So it would take 150 years to close the gap from when this book was written. Also, it says that for every dollar of white per capita income, so this is now talking about per capita income, African Americans had 55 cents in 1968, and then only 57 cents in 2001. So only 2 cents more. So at this pace, it would take blacks 581 years to close the gap. The gap between blacks and whites. Although white home ownership has jumped from 65% to 75% since 1970, black home ownership isn't quite the same. It's just gone from 42 to 48%. So it raised minimally, whereas white home ownership went up 10%. Black home ownership only went up 6%. So at this rate, it would take 1,664 years to close the gap. If current rates of incarceration continue, so being imprisoned or imprisonment, 1 out of 3 African American males born today will be imprisoned at some point in their lifetime. This again affects kind of their lifestyle, not just of them, but of people that those African American males care for. Their kids or something. They're obviously not able to make too much money from jail. I think they can get a job in there and make like 70 cents a day or something. But this is a pretty big deal. I mean, if African Americans are being thrown in jail at a higher rate for the same crimes than white people, then that's something that needs to be looked at and fixed. So at the current pace, the book also states that blacks and whites will reach college graduation parity in 2075. So basically, same rates of college graduation is what that's saying. We wouldn't reach that until 2075, which is actually, pretty good compared to 1,664 years to close the gap. College graduation looks like we're a little bit ahead of the game in that. Some not so fun facts that were mentioned in the book are listed here. One of them is that in the United States, a black applicant with no criminal record is less likely to receive a callback from a potential employer than a white applicant with a felony conviction. So, somebody that has committed a felon and was convicted for it, that is white, has a higher chance of getting a call back, which means most likely, a higher chance of getting the job, higher chance of getting a call back than somebody that just has darker skin. So that's obvious, racism right there, that just because they have a different skin color, even if they have a felony conviction, then a white person is deemed more able to do a job than somebody just because they're black. Also, studies show that from the mid-1990s through the beginning of the new century, such discrimination in low-wage jobs has remained constant, meaning that we aren't changing, which is, just as bad as all the previous facts. We're not improving ourselves to become a less racist society. Probably my favorite part of the book, or as far as this chapter goes, is that they talked about an ABC News program, Primetime, doing an experiment that was basically to determine whether a white and a black man would be treated equally in the world. They got a white guy and a black guy, and they both moved to St. Louis and compared how they were treated, basically. In this study, the black man was ignored by salespeople and was tailed as if he was a shoplifter. And it's something that we should realize is that they were two men that were actually making the same income and assumably, dressed the same and everything. It was just based off of skin color that they were treated this way. So the white man was obviously treated differently. They were greeted warmly and allowed to browse without suspicion at all. Also, when they went into a used car lot, the white man was quoted a more favorable offer than the black man was for the exact same car and the same car lot. And both pretended to have locked their keys in their cars. They were treated differently by people on the street. The white guy was helped, or the black guy was ignored. And the white guy was even offered places in an apartment building that the black guy was told that there weren't any vacancies in. Also, some more overt racism that happened is that the black man was walking down the street in a predominantly white part of town, and a white guy leaned out of the car and said, "A little far south, ain't it?" Telling him that he was not in the right neighborhood, that he basically didn't belong there. At the end of this primetime showing, the black guy is actually passed by a taxi cab and picked up the taxi cab picked up the white guy instead. This is kind of showing us that racism still exists today, and it's not gone, even though it's little things like not getting a taxi cab, or not getting the same privileges as far as places to live, places to rent, or having to pay more for cars. It's little things that build up to a larger scale. In conclusion, we are still living in a white supremacist society, and even though we have come a long way, we have a very long way to go before we can consider ourselves not a white supremacist society.